Hello, and welcome to the next big thing in ransomware recovery. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio and slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to two of them there from Rubrik. There's a link to learn more about Rubrik cyber recovery, as well as a link to the upcoming Rubrik Database Protection and Recovery Summit. Other resources in there include a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. The official terms and conditions of the prize drawing can be found also in your handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of an event like this is the opportunity to get your questions answered by our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So at the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Kev Johnson, who's a technical marketing architect at Rubrik. Let me bring Kev on. Kev, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. It's always a pleasure to be able to present at these kinds of events. Excuse
Awesome.
me.
And it's great to have you here. And before I hand things over to you, I just want to let everybody know, Kev is going to use screen sharing for his deck, so that may cover up your video window. If you want to see Kev talking, you can move windows around and resize them. And if you want to get everything back to the default view, just click on that little icon of a circle with an arrow in it at the bottom of your screen, and that'll put you back in the default. So, Kev, with that business out of the way, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Let's see if I can. Let's play the first game of online events. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. Yes.
I don't think we're giving away a prize for that one, but yeah, just to kind of reiterate, we've got plenty of time at the end of the presentation. So if you've got any questions whatsoever about any of the kind of content that I'm going to be speaking about, by all means, drop your questions in. I'll try to get to, if I can get to them as I go through, I will. Otherwise, we'll deal with them at the end. But there's plenty. I'm sure there's going to be plenty. So what I'm going to be talking about today is really it's a feature that we announced only a couple of weeks ago at our winter release event. So I'm just going to go a little bit more in depth here about what we're calling Rubrik cyber recovery. So let's just click through a couple of these slides. So because this is it's not a generally available product as yet, it's just been announced, it's coming real soon. We have to have this disclaimer slide because our legal team insists on it. But yeah, it's going to be super awesome, believe me. So in this session, what we're going to be looking at is really 4 key different areas, and then I'm going to show you how it really plugs together, because I'm a bit of a tech nerd, and I'm more interested in how stuff plugs together than the problems sometimes that they're solving. But the key questions when we're talking about cyber attacks, and cyber attacks they're not going away. I keep reading books and reports and blog posts and all of these things, and the numbers are just racking up and up and up. And it's really getting to the point where organizations really have to just assume breach. It's the only healthy way to deal with these things. We'll talk about the challenges that you might have with the tooling that you might be using to deal with some of these kinds of scenarios. We'll talk about the Rubrik approach. So this is Rubrik Cyber Recovery. and some of the benefits of that approach. And then we'll dive in to the actual, we'll show you how it works. So in terms of the key questions, so when we start talking to our customers about, the threat of ransomware attacks, cyber attacks, the first thing that they're really, that their C-suite are interested in is, how confident are we that we can get our business back up and running after an attack? Not even worrying too much about how quickly we can do it, but could we even recover? Many organizations will find that they're in a position where they actually have to pay the ransom because they don't have the tooling, they don't have the people, the processes to help them recover from something like that. And in many cases, they might not have cyber insurance. They've got to find a whole bunch of crypto coin. They've got to make that payment. The next one is when we start talking more about when people start talking about things like disaster recovery, we start seeing things like, how can we test and validate this? How can we make sure that these things actually work? Because your business changes all the time. So you need to be able to validate that the processes and the tooling that you put in place maybe 2 or 3 years ago still do the job for you. And as I'll talk about a little bit later, cyber attacks are a little bit different from disaster recovery. So kind of tying back in with that first question, how quickly are we able to restore our business? So if we're comfortable that we can recover, but in some situations, if you've got vast amounts of data that you're going to need to recover from, maybe you have to get some tapes back from somewhere like offsite storage, all of that kind of stuff. It's very, very slow. By the time that you've recovered your business, it might be too late. So these are real challenges. And then finally, this is really when we kind of think about the disaster recovery approach. Typically, disaster recovery involves, we're going to fail our entire business over from site A to site B, and that's how we're going to restore service. And there might be a whole bunch of things that you need to do. You might need to do some re-IP addressing. You might need to move staff. You might need to have cold storage to host some workstations that they can work from. There's a whole bunch of things. Cyber attacks are a little bit different because typically you don't want to go through that whole process. That might be an option for you. If that is the only option, that might be what you need to do. But with a cyber attack, if you can identify the objects, the servers, the applications, the files that have been affected by ransomware, for example, you can just recover those, and you can recover them in place without having to go through that whole process. So with that in mind, I just want to kind of draw your attention to, this is the MITRE attack, the cyber attack life cycle. So you'll see we have a whole bunch of different phases of an attack here. So we start with recon, where an attacker will, they're going to try and figure out where the weaknesses might be in your environment. We go through the process of developing some kind of attack, so they're weaponizing. They're going to deliver that, then they're going to hit the exploit. The exploit is when they get their foothold within your environment. They then establish command and control. They go on and then execute their payload. So that's the point in a ransomware attack where you start to see, for example, data being encrypted. That's the point that you notice it. The attacker is still there all that time from that point of exploit. And that might have been a couple of days, it could be weeks or even months in some cases. And this might be a challenge when we start thinking about how we recover. So yeah, there we go. We have this dwell time here. So when we start talking about traditional disaster recovery, we're talking about that whole, we're going to fail over from site A to site B. There's a challenge here in terms of integration and intelligence, in terms of knowing where that safe recovery point is. Often what we see happen when customers are trying to recover from, when businesses are trying to recover from a ransomware attack, is if they don't have visibility, if they don't have any intelligence about when the attack actually took place, they're basically just guessing when they hit when that problem first occurred. We need to have a better way of doing this. Rubrik gives you, we have tooling like ransomware investigation that can show you when the encryption happened. We also start talking about automation and agility. So again, I mentioned about traditional disaster recovery. It's typically failover from site A to site B. a lot of organizations don't actually have that site be available. So they might be looking at, okay, well, can we fail over into the cloud? Or, there are various options. Some of them are going to be faster than others. Some of them are going to be more cost effective than others, but there's always going to be business impact there. The other challenge is that with traditional disaster recovery, you have to define those recovery plans up front. With a cyber attack, you don't know what's going to be attacked, so you don't know what you're going to need to recover. So chances are you're going to have to do the whole monolith. You have to basically deal with the entire business rather than just the objects that have been affected. Because of all of these reasons, testing is typically it's manual, it's complex. I was talking to a buddy of mine who works for an insurance company, and they were doing a DR test. It took them 3 days just to fail over to DR and fail back. And he did not get a lot of sleep in that time. I do feel sorry for that chap. But, because of these reasons, the tests are rarely performed in some cases, if ever. And if you don't test something, much like with backups, if you don't test your backups, you don't have a backup. You don't know that you can recover. And the value of a backup is in the recovery, obviously. And then finally, if we want to go faster, businesses always want to go faster. So one of the challenges, and I'll get to this in a moment, is that when a cyber attack occurs, your security operations team are they're going to lock down your environment. They need to identify exactly what's going on so that they can be comfortable that they can clean it up, and they can be comfortable that everything is gone, that not just that initial attack. Remember, I mentioned the MITRE attack lifecycle. So what we have there is there may be multiple tactics, techniques, and processes that are in use by an attacker. So while you will be able to identify the point in time that the encryption happened and possibly the strain of ransomware that's in use, there may be other compromises in place within your environment that you're not necessarily aware of. So you could recover the files that have been encrypted, but if the attacker is still present, you've got problems. So we see that the forensics has to happen in series with the attack. So even if the ops team can identify that clean recovery point, the security team might not necessarily be happy for you to just recover and bring the business back online. And obviously downtime sucks. So I mentioned all of these things on the previous slide. So the current challenges with cyber recovery, it's complex, it's slow, it's error prone, and it's difficult or impossible in some cases to test without impacting on production. I'm seeing lots of comments coming in on the questions, so do keep it up. This is all good stuff. So first things that we notice, we have an attack. We don't really find out about this attack until something bad happens. So the attacker is within your environment. The first time you know about it is when somebody calls the help desk and says, I can't access my files. There's just a bunch of text files that tell me to send some Bitcoin to all of this bad stuff. What do we do? So if you're lucky, you might have a tool that can identify these things as they're happening, much like Rubrik can do with ransomware investigation. But as I mentioned earlier, production is then down until forensics are completed. So the next step is we need to basically build a sandbox. We need what we call an isolated recovery environment. So this is an environment that is separate to production, ideally, where you can do some testing. So this is where the security team they'll detonate the malware. They bring all their tooling to the table, identify what's gone on. So you have to find some compute, you have to build some networks, you need to define some storage. You then need to select a recovery point. As I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges without any kind of intelligence built in is that you're basically just guessing at what that safe recovery point is going to be. Now, you might be lucky, you might get it right first time. Chances are you probably won't. So you recover that data. Now, again, you might have to get tapes back from offsite storage. You load them into your tape library, you do your recovery into this isolated recovery environment. And at that point, the security operations team can perform their cyber investigation. using whatever tools they need to use. Now, obviously, every security team works differently, so they can just bring whatever tools they need into this isolated environment. So we do all of this scanning. We'd go, okay, right, great. Is this recovery point that we've selected, is it a clean, safe recovery point that we can bring our business back online with? And as I mentioned, chances are it's not. So you just go around that process again, and potentially again, and again, and again. And all of this time, your business is down. So yeah, as I said, this process is likely to be executed multiple times before you find that correct recovery point, that clean recovery point. So this is a challenge, but once you get there, happy days. We can now recover that to production. Now that's for one system. Chances are you have multiple sets of applications, multiple different systems in use within your organization. So basically you've got that whole process to do, whether that's in parallel or in series. You have to then identify which ones do we need to bring back online first, which ones can wait until a little bit later. But that's the current cyber recovery workflow for a lot of organizations. Oh, there we go. So if you're lucky enough to be a Rubrik customer and you have ransomware investigation and threat hunting available, then this gives you a bunch of advantages. So first of all, Rubrik ransomware investigation will now identify the strain of common ransomware attacks. So we do analysis of your backup data on your backup platform. So the data is not going to our cloud or anything like that. It happens on the platform that lives with you. And we can go, okay, we've identified some strange behavior here. Where we see that strange behavior, we'll then run that through an unsupervised machine learning process. And that machine learning process can identify with incredibly high confidence where we see encryption activity. At the same time, we can analyze the way that data has been encrypted, and we can basically cross-reference that with what we know about common ransomware attacks. We can tell you, for example, if you've been hit by Lockbit. So this is cool. We know what ransomware strain we've been hit by now. So the next thing is we take what we know about that ransomware strain and we build a threat hunt. So we go and grab our YARA rules. So that's how we define the indicators of compromise. So you can go to CISA or your anti-malware provider. You can get these YARA rules all over the place. Whatever works best for you. You then just throw that you load those into Rubrik threat hunting, and you can then use that to identify not only the place where that threat was first seen, but you can also identify the point in time when that threat was first seen. So if we think back again to the MITRE attack lifecycle, what we have is ransomware investigation can show us when the encryption happens. So that's a good place to start. We can then work back from there using threat hunting and identify, okay, we know this is most likely, it might be a specific advanced persistent threat that's within your environment. Here's what we need to look for. We can work back to the point in time when they first got their foot in the door, so to speak. And once we've done that, we can just say, okay, great, we know that clean recovery point. Let's recover that into production. No problems. So that's kind of cool. That's what you get already with Rubrik through ransomware monitoring, investigation, and threat hunting. Maybe that's not enough though. So as I mentioned earlier, what might have happened is the vector that an attacker gained a foothold within your environment for using. There may be multiple different attacks in use throughout the process. So what we need to do is identify. Okay, well, we know when the ransomware got loaded, not necessarily when the payload was activated, but we need to kind of take a few steps further back. And that's when we need that kind of sandbox, the isolated recovery environment that I mentioned on the previous slide. The other challenge is, even if you've got this capability to say, okay, we know that clean recovery point, we're confident here. If your production environment is tied up by your security operations team doing forensic investigations for potential other attacks, you can't overwrite what there is there, because they need that in order to satisfy their requirements. So we have that challenge there as well. So Rubrik Cyber Recovery, just a quick check on time, we seem to be doing pretty well. So Rubrik Cyber Recovery is a new feature that we added that kind of really builds on top of those capabilities that we already have with ransomware monitoring investigation, with threat hunting, with threat containment, with sensitive data discovery, all of these great tools that Rubrik customers have access to. And cyber recovery is something that's going to be coming to market in the not too distant future. So with this, we can take those outputs from ransomware investigation, threat hunting, and threat containment. Now, I've not mentioned threat containment other than a couple of seconds ago, but threat containment really builds on threat hunting, and it allows us to take the outputs from threat hunting, and we can identify those malicious snapshots that have been discovered in your environment. We can then quarantine those so that nobody is going to accidentally restore those into your environment. But at the same time, there's value in those quarantine snapshots. So if you have a security operations team, you might want to give them access to those snapshots because they're really useful forensic point-in-time snapshots. They can use those for investigation. So that's exactly what they can do. So we take the outputs from those tools there. We recover those selected snapshots into the isolated recovery environment. Cyber investigation takes place there. We can also do the cleanup in that isolated environment. Now, this is going to be very, very dependent on exactly how you want to do this, but we have a number of options here. So if you do that cleanup and your SecOps team say, okay, yeah, we're good, we know that everything is gone from what we have in this IRE, then what we can do is we can just promote that copy into production, overwriting what we have in production. Or if they're happy, if they're just kind of like, they want to do their investigation just to make sure that it's been cleaned up, and then they're going to manually clean up, great stuff. Just power down that isolated recovery environment. And one of the things I've not really mentioned so far about the isolated recovery environment. So how it works is we use Rubrik live mount technology. So we can pick any point in time and we can mount those virtual machines into your environment. So this could be it could be some VMware that you're sharing with test dev or even with production. You have your segregated networks, and Rubrik provides the storage. So because of this, we don't need to copy all of that data across into a recovery environment. So we can stand these environments up very, very quickly. So the other workflow that we have here is, this gives us the capability to restore business very, very quickly, but also, we can kind of take that forensic investigation out and execute it in parallel. So we take the outputs from ransomware investigation or threat hunting, whichever you're the happiest with, and we can then perform an in-place recovery. So in-place recovery is a capability that we have that allows us to basically, we use VMware change block tracking here. So we can identify only the blocks that have changed between what you have in production and the point in time that you want it to be. So we just inject those blocks back into those virtual machines. It's the fastest way to get back up and running. So business is back up and running with a fairly high degree of confidence there. So we know that the encryption isn't happening here, or we know that the threat that you've identified through threat hunting isn't present there. So you can now restore business, and the security team can at the same time continue their investigation. So they deploy the snapshots into the isolated recovery environment. They then do their investigation. They figure out, they detonate the malware, figure out exactly what's going on. They might want to see, which other hosts in the environment were being targeted for these things. And then they can determine if they need to do a manual cleanup of the snapshot that was restored. So remember, we've restored service, the business is back up and running, but if they determine that there's still a risk of something else, and maybe we just need to run some specific tools against the new production snapshots, we can absolutely do that. So it's on the SecOps team to define what that manual cleanup process is, and obviously every attack is different. They then execute the cleanup against the recovered snapshots in production, and then we discard the IRE. So we just power it down. It's no longer consuming any any compute power, any network, And the storage, it's just storage that exists on the Rubrik platform. So we power that down; it's no longer in use. So I'm just going to take a moment there and quickly click through a couple of pages of questions and see what we've got so far. Again, we've got lots of people saying hi. So hi, everyone, all over the world as well. So this is all good. And there we go. We've got a couple. How does Rubrik guarantee safeguarded backup data from malicious and correct? Right. Okay, cool. I will handle those questions. I will handle those questions towards the end of the session rather than try and deal with it here. But if you have got any questions, please do drop them in as we go through. So in terms of the benefits of cyber recovery, so as I mentioned, we have a whole bunch of different options in terms of how we can enable you to recover faster and with more confidence from a cyber attack. Something else to bear in mind is, these isolated environments, they don't have to just be used for cyber recovery. You can use them for testing patches and upgrades, anything where you need something that you can spin up quickly, do something that you need to do, without impacting on production because they're isolated, and then you just, power them down at the end of the day. The possibilities are literally endless. So the first thing really is, in terms of benefits, it allows you to test whether your cyber recovery plans work. And as I mentioned earlier, I've done a fair amount of consultancy in my life, and in terms of testing disaster recovery, as I mentioned earlier, if you're stuck on a bridge call for 3 days, that's no fun for anybody. It maybe makes you think, okay, maybe we're not going to do this. Maybe we'll just do it once a year instead of every quarter. With this, you can test your recovery plans whenever you like. You can run you can run cyber drills. You can involve the IT ops team, the SecOps team. Make sure that everybody knows, in the event of something like this happening, here's what we need to do to proceed. Because a well-oiled machine, a well-drilled machine, well-oiled machine, if everybody knows what they're doing, there's less chance of panic. There's less chance of something going wrong. We can perform those security assessments easily because we're just using live mount to power things up super quickly in your environment, and we can move those forensic investigations in parallel to recovery, so we can help you restore business faster. There we go, and my keyboard stopped working, so let's try the mouse. There we go. So one of the other questions that we got asked a lot as we were going through, we obviously build products based on feedback from customers, and one of the things that customers are super hot on was the capability to monitor these things as they're going through, so you're not just kind of like hitting a button and waiting, but also having something actionable at the end, so you can prove to your compliance team, you can prove to your cyber insurance provider that actually, yes, we have tested these processes once a month, once a week, however often you want to do it. The more often that you do it, the better the outcomes are likely to be when bad stuff happens. But we generate these reports so you can prove exactly what's happened. We can see, maybe you've made some improvements in the process so that systems are restored quicker. So you can show, in this case, it took 1 hour and 8 minutes to restore these 11 virtual machines in different priority groups using live mount. We have all of those things. We can do cyber recovery, cyber assessments more easily. So my experience with security teams is every one of them is different. Everyone has their own preferred tooling. We're not tying you in to anything specific. We're not, there is no, well, you must use Tenable Nessus or whatever tooling you want to use. You just bring it in, connect it to the same network, away you go. You can do whatever you need to do. This is all done in an isolated environment. And finally, so this is kind of the very beginning of the wizard for how this process works. So the very first thing we need to do is to determine, are we going to perform an isolated recovery or are we going to perform an in-place recovery? So isolated recovery, that's when we're going to stand up this isolated recovery environment, which we can do whatever we need to do in. In-place recovery is, okay, we're just going to use this because we need to restore service as quickly as possible. So I'm just going to take a quick mouthful of tea. And then we move on to the how it works. So this is basically what it looks like when you kick it off. So we can see in here from our orchestrated application recovery, we can see these are all of the different objects that Rubrik is protecting. Obviously, we have a whole bunch of different things. We've got different clusters in play. We've got different data centers in play and different SLA domains as well. So you don't need to define any of these things up front. So we can just go, okay, well, we're going to select 3 objects or 100 objects, whatever you need to select. You can define this at runtime rather than having to define it all up front. We then go up there, we click on Start Cyber Recovery, and this then brings us in here. So we can see in here what we've got is this is the output of a ransomware investigation. So we can see, for example, let me just grab my mouse. Over here, we've got a whole bunch of different suspicious files. So we know that there's a really good chance that we have ransomware attacking these particular objects. So in that case, we just go through here, we select the objects that are affected, and we go Start Cyber Recovery. So just having that visibility into where the encryption activity, etc., has happened is super, super helpful. So here we can see we have 3 objects that we've selected. So we've got 3 different web servers. We've done a threat hunt. So in this case, we've identified that these have been hit by Lockbit 2. And so we need to figure out where we're going to go from here. So we're going to perform an isolated recovery because, again, we're not going to do the in-place recovery. We need to figure out a little bit more about how that Lockbit attack happened and make sure that nothing else has been affected as well. We then need to select the point in time that we're interested in. So we can select any backup point that Rubrik has on the platform. But because we have these integrations with ransomware investigation, with threat hunting, and with threat containment, we can see, for example, here that we can select only if we were doing an in-place recovery, we might say, okay, we want to select the ones that have no matches from the selected threat hunt, or we might want to select if we want the bad stuff so that security operations team can do their investigations. We're probably going to be looking at something that's either got 1 or more matches in the selected threat hunt or that has been quarantined. Once we've done that, we just need to define our compute. So in this case, we're going to select a vCenter server, we're going to select a data center, we're going to select a cluster that we're going to do this recovery to. Now, again, this might be dedicated hardware that you've got specifically for cyber recovery. It could be your production environment. It could be a test dev environment. Because the isolated recovery environment is only consuming that compute, only consuming that network while it's up and running, you don't need to dedicate hardware to it necessarily. It's going to depend on security policies and everything in your environment. Once we've defined the cluster, we now need to select the relevant isolated networks. So these are predefined in vCenter server, and because these are your networks, it's down to you as the customer to ensure that they're isolated off. So whether you have firewalls between them or whether you have dedicated separate switching, whatever makes the most sense. But again, we just select the relevant networks for each object that's been selected, and away we go. The next part of the process is we need to define a recovery order. So this can be useful if you have multi-tier applications. Something else to bear in mind here is because this is isolated, you might need to also include some supporting infrastructure. So things like DNS, things like authentication. You're probably also going to need those in the isolated recovery environment. In that case, you're going to want those to come up online before you move on to your application servers, your database servers, your web servers, all of these things. So having the different priority groups can really help there. Also, we have that capability, as you can see there, that we can add pauses. So if you know you have, when you stand up your base infrastructure, you're going to want to leave it maybe 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever you need. You can add those pauses between those recovery groups, priority groups rather. And then the next thing is the capability to execute post-recovery scripts. So these recovery scripts could do any number of things. It may well be that because this is an isolated environment, you need to configure the environment to log data locally rather than sending it across your SIEM tool, because your SIEM tool is in production. This is isolated, but you still need to be able to access those logs. It may be that you want to kick off a scan with your EDR tooling. It could be almost anything. So in the initial release, we're going to be supporting Bash for Linux and PowerShell for Windows machines. These scripts can, there's three options here. We can either have them already exist on the virtual machine at the point that you back them up. So that might be a use case that works for some things, but you can also inject them as well. So either you can provide Rubrik with a path to that direct path, a path to where the script exists, or we can just hit this edit script button. And this edit script button literally just gives us this pop-up. We can paste in our script as we need it. We hit save, and at the point of recovery, once we've got to the point where that virtual machine is recovered, we'll inject that post-recovery script and we will execute it. And again, there we go. We can see that this is a Bash script, and this is exactly what you're going to get. Now, we do also have that capability there to, if you have post-recovery scripts and you want the entire recovery to fail in the event that a post-recovery script fails, just check that box there. That will cause your recovery to fail, obviously, if those criteria are met. But it may well be that for security reasons, that's preferable to just having it throw an error and warning, and you can kind of skip on. Once we've done that, we need to give the recovery a name. So it must have a name. It can be anything you like. By default, if you don't fill this in, it will call it isolated recovery, and then there'll be a time and date stamp. We also have this option to save as a recovery plan. So if you flip that switch across, you can give that recovery plan a name. And this basically allows you to save all of the details that you've selected. So the virtual machines that you've selected, the networks, the cluster, the scripting, all of that stuff is saved. The only thing that's not saved as part of a recovery plan is the point in time that you've selected. So this might be helpful if you have requirements to, for example, to regularly test the recovery of a specific set of servers. Or if you have a standard cyber recovery plan and you've identified 5 or 10 of the most important applications, and those are the ones you want to test every time. So at that point, you can save that as a recovery plan. Then in the event that you need to re-execute this, you just go and select that recovery plan, and you select the points in time, and it saves you having to go through that wizard, basically. So once we've done this, we get this pop-up which says the recovery is in progress. So we can come through here, we can monitor the progress, we can see we're at 24% on this particular workflow. And then we go through, we can see it's been successfully tested. And we can then drill into that. We can see every single step in the way. So I can't really see because of the lights in here, but we can see we have each of the different priority groups, the different virtual machines that have been brought back online. We can see we have our post-recovery validation. So we've validated that things like VMware tools are running. We've validated that the scripts have executed successfully. All of this data is there. You can download a report just by going up into the top corner there. We can click across the details. We'll get a bit more information as well. But as I mentioned earlier, one of the key things that our customers mentioned as we were kind of feeling out exactly what they needed for this specific use case was being able to prove that they'd done these tests. And so we've got some super handy tests, super handy reports that will kick out all kinds of information, including when you see failures. We see we have a failure here. It's not often you'll see vendors that will say, okay, yeah, we'll show a failure in a report. But yeah, so sometimes things happen. Maybe you've selected the wrong network and applications didn't start up successfully. But we want to see when those things fail as well as when they succeed. We want to know how long it's taken to recover. We can measure trends, all of this good stuff. So yeah, just to kind of finally wrap up this section, and I think I've done all right on timing here actually. We give you that capability to test, validate, and document the success of your cyber recovery plans. We give you that capability to mount those the backup data into isolated environments, for faster cybersecurity assessments and testing. And we also allow you to, we really enable that capability to move your forensic investigations out of band in parallel to, so that the security team can do what they need while you get on with restoring business. So that's kind of almost the end of where I am, but I did want to mention Rubrik are doing, we have a bit of a database theme in December. So we're doing this database protection and recovery summit. So if you're responsible for looking after data that's in databases, whether that's structured or unstructured data, Mongo, Cassandra, or all of that good stuff you can see on the screen, do go to our website. You can register. I think there should be a link in the downloads bit within the platform, but also on the next screen as well. And I think on that note, it's probably time to move over and start taking a look at some questions. So Scott, I think you've got some slides for us.
I do. Yep. All right. So
great stuff.
Get this slide up.
There we go.
Okay.
So yeah, if you want to learn anything more about cyber recovery, that top link there, that will take you to the website. You can you can download the data sheets and all the rest of that good stuff there. And then the bottom link is for the Database Protection and Recovery Summit. Now, I am just going to quickly have a look through these questions. If you've got any more, I've seen we've had some more come in. Please do send them in. I'm just going to go through. So if you've got any, if you got any good jokes or anything, Scott, while I read through there.
I wish I did. I didn't come prepared with a good joke. Definitely not any for a general audience. Yeah, that was a cool sneak peek at some forthcoming technology. This was nice.
Yeah.
But before we get into the audience questions, I've actually got one for you, which is, obviously Rubrik has been doing a lot of stuff for customers in terms of disaster recovery from ransomware. What are the key points about how this differs from current Rubrik disaster recovery tooling?
Yeah, sure. So it's a really good point, and you might have obviously, as I was saying at the beginning, traditional disaster recovery is typically about recovering from one site to another. So it's kind of you kind of have to do the whole shebang. And Rubrik, obviously there are many disaster recovery applications on the market. All of them kind of work in roughly the same way. You've got to replicate stuff from one place to another, and then you've got to have something that orchestrates the failover from one place to another. And Rubrik has a tool that does that. It's called Orchestrated Application Recovery, and is built into Rubrik Security Cloud. And it works in exactly that way. So you replicate the data from site A to site B, and when you need to fail over, Orchestrated Application Recovery will orchestrate that as it might sound. From a cyber recovery perspective, typically organizations want to recover in situ. So they want to be able to restore service in their primary site without having to deal with the whole failover. And this allows you to be much more granular. And the other really big difference for me is, again, I did 10 years in consultancy and doing BCDR consultancy, things like that. And one of the biggest challenges I always came across was that fact that you have to define all of these things up front. So you have to build your replication plans in. You have to make sure the replication is happening. You have make sure you deal with any challenges that you might have come across, where maybe you've lost some bandwidth on your replication, things like that. So there's a lot of care and feeding there, and being able to do that recovery in situ from a cyber attack is really, really important.
Gotcha. Okay, super. And there was a question here from Charles, who's asking, is there somewhere in the dashboard you can generate some sort of report or documentation that will outline steps taken for either postmortem or for compliance needs? Yeah,
no, that's a great question, Charles. So I think that question probably came in just before I got to the very end of the kind of the demo side of things. But yeah, so you can go in, you can select any recovery that has taken place, whether it's been successful, whether it's failed. There's a button in the top right-hand corner to generate a report. Something else that's probably quite important. I did see a question pop in. And I missed it. But there was a question about automation, and Rubrik is it's an API first organization. Anything you can do within the user interface, we have an API that you can automate all of that stuff. Whether you're a Python house, whether whether you prefer to build your automation using Go, whatever tooling you need, there's SDKs, there's APIs there. So for Rubrik Security Cloud, we are GraphQL, and for Rubrik CDM, which is kind of like the appliance which typically lives on premises, there's a REST API. There's also a GraphQL APIs in there, and SDKs that will allow you to interact with both. But for the purposes of what we're speaking about here, from an automation perspective, it's all GraphQL. We've got a whole bunch of stuff on the website. So if you go to rubrik.com/API, there's there's loads of great resources for how to get started there. But in terms of the reporting, Charles, hopefully that answers what you need. So you can automate the generation of the reports. So if you have a weekly or a monthly test or any of that kind of stuff, maybe you want to have an email that goes to your executive team, showing them, this is what we've done, this is what happened, we were successful, we failed, this is how long it took, this is how much data we moved across the wire. All of these things, reporting is super important for a lot of people. And also from a post-mortem as well. If something has failed, you need to be able to identify why it's failed.
Okay, super. And so you answered the question there from Gills. So thanks for that question, Gills, about the automation. Tony is asking, it says, I may have missed it, are backups encrypted with a key defined by the customer?
That's a really good question. So in terms of the backups, everything with Rubrik is encrypted, basically. So data in transit is encrypted, data at rest is encrypted. Now, in terms of how you do that encryption, if you have a KMS, so if you want to manage your own keys, you can absolutely do that. So that probably answers what you're looking for there, Tony. But these backups happen on Rubrik CDM. The control plane is Rubrik Security Cloud. None of the data that you back up is going up into Rubrik Security Cloud. The only exception to that is if you're using Rubrik Security Cloud to store your data as well. So we have things like Rubrik Cloud Vault where you can archive your data off to. That data can also be archived to things like AWS S3, to Azure Blob Stores, all of those kinds of things for archiving purposes. But for the backups themselves, yes, they're encrypted in transit, they're encrypted at rest as well. And if you want to manage the keys, you can. We have appliances that ship with TPMs as well, so we can handle the keys. There's a number of different ways to skin that cat.
Okay, all right, super. Hey, and you mentioned Rubrik Security Cloud. Is this part of that, or is it a separate product?
Yeah, so Rubrik Security Cloud is kind of it's what we look at as being kind of like our umbrella. So it's everything that Rubrik does. So cyber recovery is a component of Rubrik Security Cloud. Ransomware monitoring investigation, sensitive data monitoring and management, threat hunting, threat containment, cloud native backup. All of these things are a part of Rubrik Security Cloud. So yes, it absolutely is. And if you're a Rubrik Enterprise Edition customer, you get all of this stuff anyway. We're bringing all of this new stuff to market all of the time. That's how you get all of the new toys as soon as we bring them to market.
Okay. Speaking of current Rubrik customers, is there a beta available for those guys, or do they need to wait for the GA?
Yeah, so we announced it, when was it? Two or 3 weeks ago. We had our winter release event. There is going to be a beta coming. It's going to be starting, I believe, possibly late December. So in probably 2 to 3 weeks' time, we'll be looking at rolling out to beta customers. If you are a Rubrik customer, do reach out to your Rubrik account team, and they'll be able to work with product management and get you enabled for cyber recovery. So you can provide us with all of the awesome feedback that we've already been getting, but we want more of this as we bring it to market, obviously.
Okay. All right, super. There's a question here from Ted who's asking, how does Rubrik guarantee safeguarded backup data from malicious encryption and deletion?
That is a great question, Ted. So I could speak for an hour on how we do all of this stuff, but let me try and keep it quick because we've got about, 5-10 minutes or so. So when data is ingested into Rubrik, it's written into what we call Atlas. So Atlas is our internal file system, and that is an append-only file system. So once data is written there, those blocks, those chunks are finalized, and they can never be edited. So what this gives us is this immutability. So once data is written there, it cannot be updated. So if let's say, for example, you back up let's say you back up a 500 gig virtual machine. Those backups are written and the chunks are finalized. The next day, there's been some data change because that's always going to be the case. Instead of the change being written into those backup files, we just write more chunk files, and we then reference those. So that's how we kind of do the point in time recovery. So we have a pointer file that will say, okay, well, this backup that was taken, it uses these chunks in this order. So when we come to recover, we know which chunks we need to use. In terms of deletion, and again, this is a really good point. So actually, let's just go back to from malicious encryption. So if a virtual machine is encrypted, that's fine. We're just going to write a bunch more chunk files, and we can say, okay, well, we just need to roll back. So we're going to roll back. We'll use the chunk files that were written before. In terms of deletion, we have something called SLA retention lock. So SLA retention lock is a feature that you can turn on in Rubrik, and once SLA retention lock is turned on, you cannot reduce the amount of time that a snapshot must exist on the Rubrik system. You can increase it if that's what you want to do, but you cannot reduce it. No user can go in. There's no root access for users, so there's no there's no capability to go in and kind of go under the hood and delete those chunk files yourselves. You simply cannot do that. So in order to be able to for the deletion process to happen, that goes through our data lifecycle management process, and the Rubrik processes in the kernel will handle that. So the only way you can delete those files is by reducing the retention period to 0, at which point they will be aged out. If you put SLA retention lock in place, that can't happen. It cannot be done. So that kind of helps with that. We can also extend that SLA retention lock side of things. So that works when your data is on Rubrik. But if you've archived your data out to something like Microsoft Azure Blob or maybe AWS S3, there's SLA retention lock capabilities there as well. So we can use the cloud native capabilities to lock those in place. Obviously, the longer that retention period is, if you start running out of capacity or your bill gets too high, there are things to consider there. Particularly, in the cloud, once stuff is there, if you say you want to keep that data for 6 years, you're keeping it for 6 years. There's not a lot else you can do about it. So, swings and roundabouts. We do recommend that it's something that customers seriously look into, though, as part of the best practices we offer.
Gotcha. So that's the reason it's not by default, is because there are cost implications if you, yeah.
It's one of those things that it would be easy to turn on by default, but everyone's been hit by a situation where they've had a storage array and that storage array is running out of space, and if you can't delete any space on that storage array, someone's got to find the money for a new storage array, and you've got to hope that it's going to turn up quickly. It's exactly the same in terms of backup storage, in terms of archive storage. We strongly recommend that customers look into it and they use it where it's applicable. But once it's on, it's on. There is one other thing around malicious encryption, and particularly around malicious deletion. So we have a thing that can help protect against the kind of the insider threat. So the idea that maybe you don't fully trust your admin staff. So for we have a function called the two-person rule, and the two-person rule works a bit like, if you think of kind of like the nuclear launch code, you've got to have two people, they go into a room, they put a key in a lock, and they have to turn it at the same time. Two-person rule does exactly the same thing. So if you want to make specific configuration changes to the environment, and SLA retention lock might be one of those things, if you want to be able to turn those things off, what happens is it goes off to a two-person rule approver, which cannot be the same person who is requesting it. So it goes off to that two-person rule approver. And we generally recommend that these people are not operational staff. They're typically executive staff within the organization. They'll get an email. They have to then log into the system and go, okay, yes, I approve of this. No, I don't. So you kind of have to, that kind of protects against that insider threat side of things as well, which hopefully helps against the idea of malicious deletion.
Gotcha. Well, we've probably got time for, just a couple more questions. One of them here, they're asking, could we use this functionality to test system upgrades and the like? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think I might have mentioned this earlier, actually, but whatever you might need that sandbox to do, and I know back in the day when I was a sysadmin, one of the things we used to probably misuse our disaster recovery environment for was, okay, well, there's a new version of Exchange. I'm probably showing you how long it is since I've been in ops, but new versions of Exchange, we need to be able to test these things. We need to make sure these things work. So we were already replicating those Exchange boxes across to DR. So we would just fire them up in a bubble network, and we'd apply the patch, and then we'd run a whole bunch of checks, and then we'd shut them down. And yeah, you can absolutely do that with an isolated recovery environment. And the great thing is you don't have to fail everything over to DR to do it. You could do it side by side with production because everything's isolated.
Okay, great. Well, Kev,
Awesome.
I'll give you a sec for a quick scan over. I think we hit most of the questions, but feel free to shout out if you see any that you wanted to address there.
Yeah, there's a lot of people just saying hi. So hi, everyone. Oh, great stuff. Have we got everything? Yeah, I think we've covered everything. I think we have covered everything. So that's great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. This was really great, and appreciate the sneak peek into what's coming from Rubrik. All right. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. So the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card today is Tyler Olivier from South Dakota. So congratulations to Tyler. We'll be in touch about getting your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. Thank Kev again for a great presentation. And thanks as always for attending and for all your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.